welcome back, viewers at home. You're certainly joining us right here on Prime Live. Now we're about to find out about an initiative. Ooh, sekgoa. We're about to find out about an initiative called the Digital Public Infrastructure, which aims to create more accessible, efficient systems for citizens, ultimately driving economic growth and social inclusion. And for that, I am joined by Brendon Petersen, who is a tech journalist, joining us to discuss the groundbreaking partnership between the World Bank and Google. Brendon, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Now, in my wildest dream, I never thought, World Bank and Google will come together and create
Mm.
an initiative of this kind. But in helping us understand that, can you please walk us through what are the main goals for the World Bank and Google's partnership?
Yeah, I think I was just as mind blown as you were. When I first heard about this, and then actually when I got to sit there in the audience as they were talking about this the other day. But the main goal of this initiative and partnership between, Google Cloud and the World Bank is essentially to help governments in emerging markets, stand up and help sort of create AI-enabled digital public infrastructure, as you said, so that citizens are able to access essential services more easily, even, on basic phones. So in South Africa, for example, we're looking at things like, digital IDs, essential services such as healthcare, all sorts of those kind of things that, for now we still have to struggle to get access to. You go to Home Affairs and the usual line is, oh, sorry, system is offline. It's essentially to negate things like that and bring that access to more people. So this will, enable Google bring all of their services, including Gemini AI and the engineering and the cloud stack. They actually are the third largest cloud provider in the world. Combining that with obviously the World Bank bringing their financing, policy support, and obviously country programs together to be able to bring this not just to South Africa, but across the continent.
Now, Brendan, looking at our previous conversations that we've had, seeing around, the US and China fighting around data, and I think I cannot help but wonder to say, as much as there is something that's being brought to South Africa, I can't help but fight this, I don't to call it curiosity to say at what price,
Mm.
because data is the new gold, so I heard.
100%. Data is definitely the new gold, the new oil, the new thing that everyone is fighting over. And I was sitting there with a couple of colleagues from the industry, Daily Maverick, um, and a few other publications, and we were sitting there, and the shared look between us all was exactly the question that you asked. Because we're like, cool, what are the strings attached to this? And it's like someone knew that we were thinking this because as we were sitting there on stage, there are various different panels. And not just people from the World Bank, not just people from Google, but people from other parts of Africa, West Africa, North Africa, East Africa, from other parts of the world, Latin America as well, who've been part of this, with Google, with World Bank. And one of the stats that was thrown out is actually apparently that 80% of the data that is available in Africa, so across the continent, is not being used. It's just essentially it's there, but it's like we don't know it's there. We don't know what to do with it. We don't have the access to the infrastructure, so it just gets tossed and it doesn't actually get used for anything useful. So that's an interesting stat when you talk about the power and the value of data. We don't know what to do with it. And obviously, there's a lot of context around that because, the digital south has essentially been kept away from all of these technologies. So how do you know how to use something when traditionally have been kept away from all the things that allow you to use it and teach you how to use it? There's that question. But what we've seen with a lot of these things are, it's heavy government involvement. That's supposed to help curtail this. I mean, Minister Sali Malatsi was there, a few other members of the South African government were they talking about the things that we need to do as a country to make sure that yes we're moving our citizens forward, but also not essentially selling our data, selling ourselves, selling our souls to these people overseas. So I think it is a very fine line, and I think it comes down to a lot of regulation, and people in government actually know what they're talking about, what they're doing, and what the objective is that they're trying to achieve.
And now looking at the fact that, the G20 is happening this month, and, there are so many conversations that, involve B20, C20, W20, and so many 20s that exist within. In terms of looking at the G20, focusing on the government, what do you believe are the key strategies that they need to um, have in terms of allowing that whatever comes into South Africa, especially around what the World Bank and Google is about to offer, will certainly benefit the people versus allowing people to just be like a product or an end product, if I can say so.
And it's such a great call out because if you just look at, last week we had, last week and the week before, we had that massive global cloud outage from Amazon Web Services. And then just a few days later, Microsoft Azure. Those are the two largest cloud service providers in the world. And it just shows how much we're reliant on non-locally developed, sort of infrastructure and resources. And Google would sit there and tout that, oh, but we've built this cable coming into Africa. It's giving you more access to the internet. Meta's done something similar. And the skeptic that I am is like, cool, it's a great thing you've done. You didn't do it for the sake of just doing good. Let's be honest about this. It gives them a nice foothold, and a lot of control in terms of essentially what is the biggest thing for the future, which is data and internet access. Um, when it comes to these sort of things, a lot of what was spoken about and some things that I agree with is a lot of these things happen in silos. So whether it's South Africa, the South African government working in silos, from different government departments and divisions, because we know that that happens, to the continent not sticking together. It'll be one country will take this route out because maybe it is the best, but maybe it's also the easiest. We don't know. Whereas if you look at the EU, for example, look at as divided as it is, look at the US. There's a cohesive here's the end objective we're trying to work towards. Whereas across Africa, it's governments fighting itself, so internally in different countries, and then it's the countries sort of not working together. And if we're not working together as a continent, the various countries, sort of putting all the might and all the resources of Africa together to benefit us, then obviously what's going to happen is, it's these international companies are going to benefit. I think that's where the focus needs to be, is the silos need to stop.
Yeah.
It can't be a case of I don't want to share information because one, I just don't want to, because then, what does it mean for me and my job? It also can't be a case of I don't want to share information because it's in a language I don't speak or a language, I can't read or understand. It can't be a thing of, I don't want to share because we have a digital literacy problem. So we need to solve all of those things. That's what I think the real sort of focus should be as we're moving forward. Because otherwise, that's just what I like to term, putting us in a sort of right position for digital colonialism. And we don't want that.
And now my other question now is finding out how exactly will AI help make public services better, looking at the dynamics of, South Africa, the unemployed versus the employed, those who are technologically savvy and those who aren't. What is this going to offer to the larger public?
So, we've spoken on and off about AI and both the good and the bad, and we've seen, I think, sort of real world impact of what AI has had on jobs. I do want to maybe not have a caveat, but just also say, yes, the technology plays a role, but ultimately it is always the companies that just focus on the bottom line that really are making these decisions to be like, cool, we've got the tech, so, thanks, bye, you can leave now.
Yeah.
But I always believe, that technology is a tool and it's how it's used that either brings the good or the bad, the benefits or the negatives. And I think with something like this, where we're looking at, digital public infrastructure, the benefits are, we just mentioning digital literacy, for example. I don't know how to use the most basic of smartphones, which is a common thing for many people and completely understandable. So now if you look at AI, for example, you have the potential, not that Google said that this is what's going to happen, but you have the potential to be able to speak to the device. So instead of having to figure out what to type, what app to open, how to do this, how to do that, you speak to the phone like you have a normal conversation like we're having now and say, I need to get a new ID. I need to apply for a loan. I need to whatever the case might be. And you speaking to the device in your language, whether it's English, whether it's Sutu, whether it's, whatever the language is, it doesn't matter. You speak to the device in very sort of plain, simple language, in your language, and it's then able to actually take you through the steps, communicate with you, tell you what to do. I think that on its own is a game changer. It doesn't mean that you have to have the most expensive 30, 40, 50, 60,000 rand phone. You could have a phone that costs under 1,000 rand so long as it's able to connect to the internet. So I think things
Certainly.
like that, service delivery, which has been such a massive thing for this country for how many decades now? We've complained on and off different parts of the country. It's looking to solve things like that so that heaven forbid you need to go to a home affairs one day, you're not going to hear the dreaded sorry system offline. Because if that doesn't work, you can go onto your phone and you can do these things there.
And looking at the African continent, there's always this conversation. I haven't done much research to say, okay, this is what I believe. But there's always this conversation that's happening around, poor infrastructure to enable or to have the necessary technological advancement that we need as a continent. And I think this brings me to find out how exactly is World Bank as well as Google looking into addressing this. And most importantly, looking at this initiative, which countries would benefit from this project?
So this is such an interesting question because the World Bank has already supported DPI, so digital public infrastructure programs, in various different forms. So whether it's payments, whether it's data sharing, whether it's digital ID, because we've been hearing a lot about that also in the US. That's one of the things that they're looking at potentially, bringing to South Africa in the future. But they're already supported in over 60 countries. So, the traction obviously is different, depending on what the infrastructure was beforehand, many sort of different supporting sort of things that they would have needed and would have enabled this. But I think, if you look at a continent or subcontinent like India, for example, they've been doing this for a while. We had a lot of people from various parts of the government, of the Indian government, actually at the announcement as well, talking about some of the stuff that they've done. Where you want to talk about a country that is very traditionally poor, where maybe there isn't a lot of that digital infrastructure, where there isn't a lot of that digital literacy. And for them, it was a matter of months where these things were able to start working. We've had people from various parts of Africa, Ghana, Kenya, all sorts of different parts of the continent, talking about what they've done with World Bank and with Google. And again, it's a matter of months where these things have started rolling out. So, there are countries, both locally, both abroad, where these things are already working, and it may not be the full exact sort of same stack that we're looking at for South Africa, but it's been various parts of these things that they're like, well, this is what we need the most right now. So there are definitely examples and, various parts of different countries where examples of these things are working. They're talking about Kenya, for example, where I think the stat was over 90%, or at least 90% of transactions in Kenya are still done via cash, which, for many people is still a big surprise. But if you look at digitization, how do you then sort of make the jump from a cash-based society to now sort of, banking the unbanked, having people put their money into a financial institution of one form or another and able to access it from their phones? So there's also a lot of cultural education and change that needs to come along with these things.
Certainly, and I'm hoping through our conversation tonight, this will be an opportunity that inspires individuals who are so taken by technology and just the digital world to really invest in creating our own so that we are not reliant on external actors, but more, we also
Mm.
get to collaborate with external actors so we can, because I strongly believe that as South Africans, we can best create platforms and opportunities for fellow South Africans. It's very, quite looking for a miracle to expect Google to come and bring solutions that will speak to our people. But just in closing, Brendon, why is digital infrastructure important for a country's development?
We can't ignore that the world is more digital now than ever before. And I think if you look at this digital infrastructure and development, I think really it's sort of the modern equivalent of roads and power, and roads and electricity. You know, um, there's the saying that first America built the roads, then the roads built America. It's that sort of equivalent. We don't have a choice anymore. And if you're not part of the digital infrastructure, you are unfortunately just going to get left behind as a country, as a people. It's going to potentially lower the cost of, delivering services at scale, again, also widen inclusion, whether that's education, IDs, health, all, banking, financial services. And, obviously for businesses, potentially boost productivity because, there's a great stat that says where digital access is weak, essentially countries are falling behind. And, only 1 in 4 people in low income countries in 2022 were actually online. With much slower speeds. And as more things, work and connectivity and all these things are going digital, we have to move forward, and we cannot be sitting, at the back. The only way for us to have that equal sort of seating at the table, which is what you were hinting at, collaborating with these companies instead of relying on them,
Mm.
is for us to have that digital infrastructure.
Brendon, thank you so much for that very honest as well as robust, take when it comes to understanding, this initiative called the Digital Public Infrastructure. And I think this will allow us to look at how we consume whatever's being brought to us, rather than being an end user, let us be proactive
Mhm.
users and probably be initiators at that. But thank you so much for joining us this evening, Brendon.
Thank you again for having me.
Viewers at home, that was our tech journalist Brendon Petersen sharing an insight around this very ambitious initiative called the Digital Public Infrastructure that is being initiated through a partnership between World Bank and Google in terms of enhancing public services in developing countries, including our very own South A. And this is being done by harnessing AI technologies. But viewers at home, hope that brought insight to you, and hopefully it inspired you to be one of the individuals who are going to be creating groundbreaking, cloud services, if not platforms that are from South Africa, by South Africa, ultimately to benefit South Africa. But viewers at home, this is where we close it off for now. Let's head over to an ad break. When we come back, we have more for you right here on Prime Live.